The HOA's abuse of power, a haughty woman with racist inclinations, and a silent community complicit in injustice all joined forces to strip a black man of his rightful property on his own land. But he didn't back down. This is the intense battle to expose prejudice and defend justice. Share where you're watching from and hit subscribe to ensure you don't miss this shocking story. Malik is a black man who has spent his entire life working tirelessly, overcoming countless obstacles and prejudices. A talented and determined engineer, he has always dreamed of a place he could truly call home, a sanctuary of peace after years of relentless effort. That dream finally came true when Malik purchased a spacious and serene plot of land on the edge of an upscale neighborhood. The land was like a dream come true, with sprawling green lawns, towering shade trees, and the privacy he had longed for. Malik felt a deep sense of pride as he stood on his property, gazing at the newly renovated house and imagining peaceful mornings sipping tea while watching the sunrise through the trees. It was a well-earned reward for his hard work, a new beginning where he could live in peace. But that dream didn't last long. Within the first week of moving in, Malik began noticing strange signs on his land. At first, it was just a few faint tire tracks on the lawn, which he assumed were remnants from the previous owner. However, one afternoon, while trimming the hedges along his driveway, Malik witnessed a large truck driving across his property. The vehicle ignored his presence entirely, cutting through the grass and heading into the nearby residential area. Malik was puzzled but didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe they got lost, he thought, brushing off his unease. But it didn't stop there. Over the following days, vehicles continued to appear, driving across his property as if it were a public thoroughfare. It wasn't just cars, it was trucks and SUVs too, their tires leaving deep ruts in the soil and damaging the lush grass he had just started to nurture. Each time, Malik stood back, observing from a distance and wondering if this was some long-standing habit of the neighborhood. But the more it happened, the heavier his heart grew. Did these people know it was private property? Or did they simply not care? Malik didn't want to assume the worst about his new neighbors, but their indifference and disregard for his property made him feel disrespected. The dream of a peaceful haven began to fade. Malik realized that protecting his rights might not be as straightforward as he'd hoped. He started asking himself, how could he truly enjoy the land he had worked so hard to own? Insecurity began to creep into Malik's mind as vehicles not only continued to cross his property, but did so with increasing frequency. During rush hours, the stream of cars seemed endless, their tires carving deep grooves into the once pristine grass he had taken pride in maintaining. What were once faint tire marks had now turned into deep ruts, with grass torn apart and mud strewn everywhere. One morning, as Malik stood on his porch sipping a cup of coffee, a sleek black SUV suddenly veered off the main road onto his land. The vehicle sped across his property, kicking up clouds of dust and grinding its tires against the grass before sharply turning in another direction. Malik set his coffee down, hurried onto the lawn, and waved his arms to signal the driver to stop. But instead of slowing, the person behind the wheel, a middle-aged white man, glared at him with a cold, dismissive expression, as if Malik's presence was a nuisance. The SUV sped off without hesitation, leaving behind a trail of mud and a lingering sense of violation in Malik's chest. Malik stood frozen for a few seconds, staring at the disappearing vehicle, a wave of indescribable frustration washing over him. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The man in the SUV hadn't looked confused or apologetic when Malik signaled. On the contrary, his glare was filled with contempt, as if Malik had no right to protest on his own land. That night, Malik couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept circling back to the cars, to that icy glare. The next morning, he resolved to observe more closely. While standing in his yard, he noticed that the main road leading into the nearby residential area was frequently congested during rush hours. It dawned on him why people were choosing to cut through his property, but he still couldn't understand what made them think they had the right. Determined to get to the root of the problem, Malik walked along his property, where the overlapping tire tracks had formed a distinct makeshift pathway. At the end of this makeshift road, he discovered it connected to a street in a residential neighborhood governed by a homeowners association, HOA. The route was clear and far more convenient than the often jammed main road. Malik wondered whether the previous owner of his land had allowed this shortcut, or if it was simply an act of entitlement that no one had bothered to question. Back home, Malik spent the entire afternoon combing through the legal documents from his land purchase. The paperwork confirmed that the property was private, with no easement or agreement permitting its use as a public thoroughfare. This realization only heightened his frustration. They know this isn't public land, yet they act like it's their right, he thought. A few days later, Malik decided to confront some of the trespassers directly. One morning, while repairing the damaged lawn, he noticed a silver sedan slowly making its way onto his property. He stepped into the makeshift road and raised his hand, signaling the driver to stop. The driver, a well-dressed blonde woman, rolled down her window. Instead of apologizing, she fixed Malik with a hard stare and said bluntly, "I've been using this road for years. This is a shared path. You have no right to block it." "This is my property," Malik responded calmly. "I haven't given anyone permission to use it." The woman scoffed. "You just moved in, didn't you? Don't make this complicated. We've lived here for decades, and this road has always been this way. You can't just change things because you feel like it." With that, she rolled up her window and drove off, leaving Malik standing there, a mix of anger and helplessness swirling within him. He realized that for some people in this community, respect was non-existent, especially when it came to someone like him, a black man asserting ownership over his own land. The frustration following his confrontation with disrespectful neighbors pushed Malik to dig deeper into the issue. If these people think they have the right to use my land, someone at the HOA must be behind this, he thought. So, on Monday morning, he scheduled a meeting with the HOA, the entity supposedly responsible for overseeing all community matters. When Malik arrived at the HOA office, he couldn't help but notice the stark contrast. The office was bright, tastefully decorated with landscape paintings, and the words, "Building a Civilized Community Together," prominently displayed on the wall. Yet, the atmosphere was far from the welcoming image they sought to portray. As he walked in, he caught the curious, somewhat distant glances from the receptionist. They asked for his name in a mechanical tone before briskly announcing, "Miss Judith will see you shortly. Please follow me." Judith, the HOA president, was a middle-aged white woman exuding authority in everything from her posture to the way she regarded Malik as he entered her office. Unlike the luxurious surroundings, there was no warmth in her demeanor. As soon as Malik began explaining the reason for his visit, Judith tilted her head, squinted slightly, and interrupted him with an even condescending tone. "This issue isn't new. That path has been used for years. Everyone around here knows. That?" Malik remained composed and replied, "But according to the legal documents, that portion of land belongs to me. There's no record indicating it's a shared access road. I'm here seeking the HOA's support to resolve this matter." Judith shook her head, leaning forward slightly, her voice carrying a patronizing edge as if she were lecturing an uncomprehending student. "You're new here, aren't you? Maybe you're not familiar with how things work around here. Don't trouble your neighbors over a few cars. They don't mean any harm." Malik could feel the implied message behind her words. How things work around here sounded like a warning, a subtle reminder that he, a black man, was not truly part of this community. "Ma'am, this isn't just a few cars. They've damaged my lawn and are trespassing on my property without permission. I need a solution," Malik emphasized, his eyes steady but his tone polite. Judith gave a faint, dismissive smile and tapped her fingers lightly on the desk. "To be honest, the HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over that portion of land. It's not within the community's bounds. If you'd like, you can handle it yourself. But remember, causing conflict with your neighbors isn't a good idea." Malik felt as though he had hit a brick wall. Judith wasn't just shirking responsibility. She was clearly framing him as the troublemaker, someone undeserving of fair treatment. Her demeanor was not only indifferent, but carried veiled undertones of racial bias. It was as if she were subtly suggesting that Malik, as a newcomer and a black man, should avoid disturbing the order that the HOA was accustomed to maintaining. Malik didn't react immediately. He knew that giving in to his emotions would only make things worse. Instead, he stood up politely, thanked Judith for her advice, and left the office. But deep down, he understood there was no hope of assistance from the HOA. Judith had made it clear they didn't care and wouldn't help. That afternoon, Malik sat at his dining table, staring out the window at the patch of land that had now been turned into a muddy, makeshift road. His fists clenched. He had tried cooperating, had followed the proper channels, only to be met with indifference and disdain. "If they won't help me, I'll do it myself," Malik resolved. Opening his laptop, he began researching legal solutions to protect his property. Malik knew he would have to act on his own to reclaim the rights and respect he deserved. Leaving the HOA office, feeling frustrated but undeterred, Malik knew it was time to stand up for his property. He had spent too long waiting for someone else to provide a solution, and now he realized no one truly stood by him except himself. The first step Malik took was hiring a construction crew to build a fence around his land. He had thoroughly reviewed the legal documents, ensuring everything was within the bounds of the law. The crew arrived early in the morning, bringing iron posts and sturdy wire mesh, and began their work amidst the clanging of hammers, the drilling, and the rumble of machinery. From the moment the first posts were driven into the ground, Malik could feel the scrutinizing stares of the neighbors around him. Cars that passed by slowed down, some stopping altogether as drivers rolled down their windows to gawk at him and the construction crew with expressions of surprise and thinly veiled annoyance. Standing beside the workers, Malik supervised the project, doing his best to ignore the looks, but the tension was undeniable. As the fence began to take shape, so did the neighbors' opposition. One afternoon, while Malik was helping the crew stretch the wire mesh, a red sedan pulled up at the entrance to his property. A white woman, elderly and dressed in an ostentatious floral dress, stepped out. She pointed at the fence and shouted, "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is our shared access road. You have no right to put up a fence here." Malik looked up, responding calmly, "Ma'am, this is my property. I have every right to protect it and prevent unauthorized use." The woman glared at Malik with open disdain. "Your property. You just moved in, and now you're trying to ruin our lives? This road has been used for decades, and we don't need you coming here to change that." "This is not a public road," Malik emphasized, maintaining his polite tone. "If you wish to continue using it, consult a lawyer or seek my permission. But, for now, please respect my decision." The woman shook her head angrily, marched back to her car, and sped off, not forgetting to leave a scornful parting shot. Unbelievable. Even this we can't have peace about. Similar confrontations unfolded in the days that followed. Some neighbors were unapologetic in expressing their displeasure. They yelled as they passed by, and a few even came to Malik's door to complain. He felt increasingly isolated. Since moving into the neighborhood, Malik had hoped to find a friendly community, but reality had proven to be the exact opposite. The subtle remarks and judgmental glances made a harsh truth clear. Their resentment wasn't just about the fence but also about his presence, a black man, in a neighborhood historically dominated by people like them. Nevertheless, Malik stood firm. He spent his evenings overseeing the construction, inspecting every angle and every post to ensure there were no vulnerabilities. He also had a sturdy iron gate installed at the entrance along with a large sign that read, "No trespassing, private property." Every time he looked at the fence taking shape, Malik felt a measure of relief, a sense that he was finally regaining control over his land. But, at the same time, he understood that this was about more than property rights. It was also a confrontation with prejudice, contempt, and hostility from neighbors who resented his very presence. The next morning, after the fence was finally erected, Malik stepped out into his yard, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. His property was now, at last, properly secured. But that peace didn't last long. From a distance, the blaring honk of a car shattered the stillness. Malik looked toward the gate and saw an SUV parked squarely in front of the entrance. Inside the vehicle sat a white woman wearing a pale blue dress and oversized sunglasses that nearly swallowed her face. The woman stepped out of the car with an air of urgency and authority. She stood tall, one hand on her hip, her eyes scanning the freshly built fence as though it was a personal affront. Malik approached the gate, keeping a safe distance, but before he could utter a word, the woman spoke in a voice both cold and commanding. "Are you the owner of this property?" she asked, her tone sharp and icy. "Yes, I am," Malik replied, striving to maintain a polite demeanor. "I'm Karen, the vice president of the HOA," she announced, as if her title alone should inspire fear or deference. "I need you to open this gate immediately. This is a public road, and you have no right to block it." Malik held her gaze, sensing the unmistakable hostility behind her words. He replied calmly, "Ms. Karen, this is not a public road. This is private property, and I put up the fence to protect it." Karen squinted, stepping closer to the gate. "You clearly don't understand how things work around here. This road has been used by the residents of this community for years. You can't just move in and start changing everything." The way she emphasized the word "you" wasn't lost on Malik. It wasn't just about the fence. Her anger carried undertones of indignation that someone like Malik, a black man, would assert ownership and disrupt what she considered the traditions of this neighborhood. "Ms. Karen," Malik said, keeping his tone measured, "I understand that people may have used this path in the past, but that doesn't change the fact that it's on my land. I have the legal right to protect my property." Karen folded her arms, her eyes gleaming with challenge. "You might think so, but I know the rules around here better than you do. If you don't open this gate right now, I'll call the police." Malik felt the tension in the air rising, but resolved not to let it rattle him. "Feel free to call them if you believe it's necessary," he said evenly. "I'm more than willing to explain to the authorities that I'm exercising my legal rights." His response seemed to catch Karen off guard. Perhaps she was accustomed to people caving under the weight of her false authority, and Malik's composed reaction threw her off balance. But only for a moment. She quickly regained her haughty demeanor. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Karen said, her voice laced with menace. "The HOA doesn't tolerate anyone disrupting the order around here, and you will face consequences." "Miss Karen," Malik said, his voice slightly firmer this time, "you should understand that the HOA has no jurisdiction over my property. This is private land, and I have all the documentation to prove it. If you continue to harass me, I'll have no choice but to involve the law." Karen's face flushed with anger, likely stung by the immediate rebuttal. Tossing her hair, she backed away toward her car, but not before hurling a parting shot. "Don't think this is over. I'll make sure you regret going against the HOA." Malik watched as the SUV sped off, his emotions a turbulent mix of frustration and resolve. He knew Karen wasn't bluffing. Her actions revealed a deep-seated sense of entitlement and an unwillingness to let the matter go. But Malik wasn't one to back down either. He had prepared for this, and if it came to a fight, he was ready to stand his ground. For the first time, Malik fully grasped the isolation he was up against. Yet, instead of fear, a new determination ignited within him. This wasn't just about protecting his land anymore. It was about defending his rights and dignity against those who dismissed and disrespected him. Karen didn't let her threats become empty words. Just a few hours after their tense confrontation, Malik heard the piercing sound of police sirens echoing from the main road. 2 police cars slowly pulled up in front of his house, their lights flashing. Standing calmly on his porch, Malik watched as Karen stepped out of her SUV, wearing a smug expression, as if she had summoned an entire army to take him down. Karen, with her self-satisfied demeanor, waved one of the officers over. Malik could hear her shrill voice ring out clearly. "There he is. He's the one who put up a barricade on a public road blocking our access. He has no right to do that. We've been using this road for years, and now he's trying to turn it into his private property. This is illegal." Malik stepped off the porch, maintaining a calm appearance, though tension coursed through him. He knew Karen wasn't just someone who exaggerated. She was determined to pressure him by any means necessary. As one of the officers approached him, Malik spoke in a measured tone. "Officer, I am the legal owner of this property. The area she's referring to is not a public road, but private land that belongs to me. I have all the documentation to prove it." He carefully retrieved a file from inside his house. Inside were the property maps, land ownership certificates, and other documents he had prepared in advance. Pointing to the map, he explained clearly, "This is my land. The path she's talking about is entirely within the boundaries of my private property. I put up the fence because neighbors kept trespassing and damaging my land." The officer examined the map and documents intently. Meanwhile, the other officer stood near Karen, listening as she continued to raise her voice. "He's just trying to game the system. That's obviously a shared road. We've been using it for years, and now he suddenly puts up a fence? How are we supposed to tolerate this?" After a few moments, the officer finished reviewing the documents and nodded at Malik. "Everything checks out," he said, turning to his colleague. "This is private property. There's no indication that it's a public road. He has every right to restrict access on his land." Malik exhaled a sigh of relief, but Karen exploded. "No way. He's lying to you. Do you even know the HOA has jurisdiction over everything in this area? I'm the HOA vice president, and I can guarantee you that road doesn't belong to him." One of the officers tried to calm the situation, raising his hand. "Ma'am, the HOA has no authority over private property. If you have a legal dispute, you'll need to file a complaint in court, not call the police to handle it." But Karen, seemingly losing control, continued yelling. "He has no right to do this. He just moved in and is already ruining our community. This is destructive." Her attitude was beginning to wear on both the officers and Malik. The second officer stepped closer to her, speaking softly but firmly. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the documents and confirmed that he hasn't broken any laws. If you continue to raise your voice and disrupt the peace, we'll have to ask you to leave. This is his property." Karen threw up her hands, her face flushed with anger, her eyes blazing. "You don't know what you're doing. You're siding with the wrong person. I won't let this end." "Here," she spat, storming back to her SUV. But before leaving, she turned to Malik and issued a final, venomous warning. "You'll regret ever going up against the HOA." As Karen's SUV sped off, Malik turned back to the officers. They nodded at him, their expressions showing understanding for the absurdity he'd just endured. "We'll document this incident," one officer said, "if she or anyone else continues to harass. You don't hesitate to call us." Malik thanked them, but as he stepped back into his house, he couldn't shake the thoughts swirling in his mind. Karen wasn't just out of control, she was clearly intent on doing everything she could to crush him. But Malik knew that with his calm demeanor and solid legal footing, he had claimed the first victory in what promised to be a grueling battle. In the days following the incident with the police, Malik felt the tension around him grow even thicker. The stares of the neighbors when he stepped outside no longer stopped at mere scrutiny. They now carried an unmistakable hostility. Still, Malik refused to let it faze him. He focused on his work, continuing to protect and care for his land. But the real storm was still smoldering, waiting to erupt. On Tuesday morning, Malik received a letter from the HOA. It was sent in the name of the board, but every line was dripping with Karen's influence. Urgent request. Remove the unauthorized fence and restore the shared pathway for the benefit of the community. Malik read the lines over and over, suppressing his anger. They were not only brazenly declaring that his land was a shared pathway, but also weaponizing the phrase community benefit to assert authority. Malik immediately recognized Karen's hand in this. Unable to overpower him through the police, she was now using the HOA as a tool to pressure him. This didn't surprise Malik. Karen had already shown she wasn't one to back down easily, yet he couldn't help but feel a growing disappointment. An organization like the HOA should have been a neutral party, mediating disputes fairly. Instead, they chose to side with Karen, even enabling her abuse of power. The letter threatened legal action if Malik didn't comply within 14 days. Words like unauthorized, community disruption, and necessary actions were wielded as psychological weapons. But Malik wasn't intimidated. He knew what he was doing, and he had prepared for the next steps. That very day, Malik contacted a lawyer specializing in real estate disputes and property rights. Robert Green, an experienced attorney, listened carefully as Malik recounted the entire situation. Not only was Robert empathetic, but he also quickly identified the underlying motives behind the HOA's actions. "The HOA is trying to intimidate you," Robert said, his voice calm but incisive. "Based on the documents you've provided, they have no authority to demand you remove the fence. They're hoping you'll cave without scrutinizing the legalities." Malik nodded. "I'm not planning to back down, but I want to make sure everything I do is by the book." "And you're absolutely on the right track," Robert reassured him. "I'll draft a formal response to the HOA, asking them to clarify the legal basis for their demands. From what I've seen, they don't have any legitimate grounds to take legal action against you." While Robert handled the legal aspects, Malik couldn't ignore the mounting pressure from his neighbors. One morning, as he inspected the fence, a middle-aged man walking by suddenly stopped and stared at him with judgmental eyes. "You should reconsider what you're doing," the man said, his tone low and laden with insinuation. "We're a community, and we don't appreciate people disrupting the harmony here." Malik didn't respond, maintaining a calm gaze as the man walked away. Those few words, though brief, carried a heavy weight. Malik understood that he wasn't just up against Karen or the HOA. He was confronting a deeply ingrained mindset within this community, one that viewed him as an outsider, an intrusion into their perfect world. That afternoon, Malik sat at his desk, reading over the draft response Robert had sent him. The letter didn't just refute every demand from the HOA, but also warned that any legal action on their part would be considered an abuse of power. It was sharp and well argued, bolstering Malik's confidence. "This isn't just about protecting my land," Malik thought to himself. "This is about defending my right to exist and be respected in this community." Malik signed the letter and sent it back to his lawyer. He knew this was only the beginning of a long battle, but he was ready. Within him, determination was steadily replacing the initial apprehension. Malik understood that legal letters and responses, though necessary, would not be enough to deter Karen and the HOA from continuing their pressure. He knew he needed a stronger move, a way to bring his story to light and hold those behind this injustice accountable. After many sleepless nights, Malik decided to reach out to a local TV station known for investigative reports on community injustices. Malik composed an email, recounting his entire story, from the neighbors disregarding his property rights and Karen's hostility to the HOA's unreasonable demands. He emphasized how all these actions not only violated the law but also carried undertones of racial discrimination. Along with the email, he attached legal documents, photos of the criticized fence, and security camera footage showing Karen's confrontation with the police. Just a day later, Malik received a response from the TV station. They expressed great interest in his story and wanted to schedule an on-air interview that week. Malik agreed, understanding this was his chance not only to defend himself but also to stand against the injustice he, and likely others, were facing. On the morning of the interview, a team of reporters arrived at Malik's home with cameras and recording equipment. Malik greeted them with calm composure, though he couldn't completely hide his anxiety. He sat in front of the camera, his gaze steady, and began to recount his story. "I moved here, hoping to find a peaceful place to live," he began. "But from the very first days, I realized that some people in this community didn't respect my property rights. They treated my land as if it were public property, completely ignoring its legal boundaries." Malik detailed his confrontation with Karen and the HOA's behavior, emphasizing how their actions went far beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. They didn't just try to impose their will on me. They used intimidation and abuse of power to force compliance. And the most painful part is that their actions are clearly rooted in prejudice simply because I'm a black man. Malik's story aired that evening on a local TV channel. The segment was carefully produced, including images of the fence, property maps, and even the footage of Karen confronting the police. The news anchor not only narrated Malik's story but also posed sharp questions about the HOA's role and their abuse of authority. The morning after the broadcast, Malik felt the impact of the coverage. His email inbox was flooded with messages from people across the area, most offering support and encouragement. Some shared their own stories of facing similar treatment and thanked him for speaking out. Other residents in the neighborhood, who had previously remained silent, began expressing dissatisfaction with Karen and the HOA. Some even visited Malik to apologize for using his property without permission. A young woman admitted, "I didn't realize how wrong it was until I saw your story on TV. Thank you for standing up for your rights." As Malik received support from the community, Karen and the HOA began feeling the pressure. Neighbors who had previously feared the HOA's power now started questioning its operations. Online forums were filled with criticism of Karen, with some sharing past accounts of her misuse of authority, proving this wasn't the first time she had oppressed others. Karen, once domineering, now faced opposition from the very community she once controlled. But instead of backing down, she grew more aggressive. An insider from the HOA revealed that Karen was pushing the board to file a lawsuit against Malik, hoping to use the legal system as a tool of suppression. Despite public support, Malik understood that the battle with Karen and the HOA was far from over, but now he was no longer alone. The media's attention not only gave him a stronger position but also forced those applying pressure to reconsider their actions. "This isn't just my story," Malik said in a follow-up interview. "It's the story of everyone who's ever faced injustice, been disregarded, and felt like their voice wasn't heard. I won't back down, not just for me, but for others as well." When the bright lights of the television broadcast illuminated the shadowy corners of the story, Karen began to feel pressure from all sides. In the days following the report's airing, the HOA's email inbox was flooded with complaints from residents. It wasn't just Malik's supporters. Many others who had suffered under Karen's overreach and the HOA board's excessive control also raised their voices. An emergency HOA meeting was called shortly after, but instead of receiving the usual support, Karen realized her once absolute authority was crumbling. Some board members started to question her actions. One member openly criticized her during the meeting. "Karen, this isn't the first time you've abused your position. We've received far too many complaints about how you handle issues in this community. Now, this incident has been broadcast on TV, tarnishing the HOA's reputation." Unwilling to back down, Karen fired back, "I'm only trying to protect the community's interests. If we let Malik continue like this, we'll lose control over this neighborhood." However, Karen's justifications no longer held sway. Some residents, previously too intimidated to speak out, found their courage. During a community meeting, an elderly woman stood up and confronted her. "Karen, you always say you're acting for the community, but the truth is, you just want to control everyone. I've lived here for over 20 years, and this is the first time I've seen the HOA act so unjustly." Another man chimed in, "Malik's story is just the tip of the iceberg. We've allowed Karen to overstep her authority for far too long." Cornered, Karen remained defiant. She tried to redirect public opinion, accusing Malik of stirring up the community and exploiting the media to pressure the HOA. Karen went further, announcing her plans to pursue legal action against Malik for disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. She organized a small press conference, backed by a few loyal HOA supporters, but the event quickly turned into a disaster. When asked to provide legal grounds for demanding Malik remove his fence, Karen gave evasive answers and failed to produce any concrete documentation. A reporter bluntly asked, "If that land truly belongs to Mr. Malik, why is the HOA demanding he remove the fence without clear evidence?" Flustered, Karen's face betrayed her anger as she called Malik a troublemaker, but failed to offer any convincing responses. The fallout from the press conference only fueled public outrage, with many people expressing their frustration on online forums and social media. While Karen faced mounting criticism, Malik began to notice a significant shift in public sentiment. Some neighbors who had previously been indifferent or sided with the HOA came to apologize. A young woman, who had often used Malik's property as a shortcut, approached him sheepishly. "I honestly didn't realize how much trouble cutting through your land caused. Thank you for standing up for your rights. This has made me rethink how the HOA operates." Malik also received supportive messages from people outside his community. One man from another state wrote, "I've been in your shoes when my HOA tried to overstep their bounds on my property. You've done what so many are afraid to do. Speak out against injustice. Stay strong." The growing public pressure forced the HOA to reevaluate Karen's leadership. Some board members began suggesting she step down to protect the organization's reputation. Yet Karen clung to her position, refusing to resign and continuing to blame Malik for the escalating situation. Meanwhile, Malik understood that this was only the first step in a prolonged battle. Despite Karen losing support, she still wielded significant power and seemed willing to use any means to obstruct him. But with the community and legal principles on his side, Malik knew he had a stronger foundation than ever before. The growing pressure from public opinion weighed heavily on the HOA, forcing them to call an emergency meeting to address the Malik issue. The hall where the meeting was held, usually sparsely attended, was now packed to capacity. Malik entered the room with a mix of tension and determination. He wasn't just armed with legal documents, property maps, and video evidence of previous incidents. He carried a clear goal: to uncover the truth. Karen, as always, sat at the center with a domineering attitude. Dressed in a dark suit, her face radiated smugness. When Malik stepped in, her gaze flicked over him with disdain, as if he didn't deserve to be in the room. The meeting began with a speech from Karen. Her voice rang out with authority. "We are facing a serious issue that threatens the stability and interests of our community. Mr. Malik here has erected an illegal fence on a road that our residents have used for years. This act not only inconveniences residents, but also disrupts the harmony of our neighborhood." A few residents nodded, but many remained silent. Some even looked at Karen with skepticism. She continued, her tone growing sharper. "As the HOA board, it is our responsibility to protect the collective rights of our community. I propose that Malik be ordered to remove the fence immediately to restore order." Malik stayed composed, listening to Karen's accusations. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up, placed his stack of documents on the table, and spoke calmly. "Before we delve deeper into this matter, I'd like everyone to take a look at this." He unfolded a property map pointing out the boundaries of his land. This is my private property, clearly outlined in my land ownership certificate. The path that the HOA and Ms. Karen referred to as a public road lies entirely within these boundaries. There is no legal basis to classify it as a public road. Malik then presented footage from his security camera showing Karen confronting him and the police. In the video, the police confirmed that he had not broken any laws and had every right to protect his property. "I have followed the law in every step," Malik concluded. "I am not trying to make life difficult for anyone, but I cannot stand by while my property is encroached upon and misused." HOA members began murmuring among themselves, clearly taking Malik's evidence seriously. One member, an elderly man, stood up and asked, "Ms. Karen, if this is private property as Malik claims, what grounds do we have to demand? He take down the fence?" Karen, cornered, tried to maintain her composure, but her voice faltered. "That path has been used for years. We can't let this precedent destroy the structure of our community." Another member interjected, "But that's not a legal argument. If we push this issue further, the HOA could face a counter-lawsuit. We need to think carefully." Karen's patience began to wear thin, and her voice rose. "Don't you understand? If we let this slide, anyone can do the same. We'll lose control over this entire area." But Karen's arguments no longer held weight. She began to realize that not everyone in the room supported her approach. Some members, previously loyal to Karen, now started questioning her leadership. The meeting dragged on for over 2 hours, filled with heated debates. In the end, the board decided not to take any legal action against Malik. They also requested that Karen cease her inflammatory remarks about him to prevent further damage to the HOA's reputation. As the meeting concluded, Karen stormed out of the room, her face flushed with anger. She refused to look at Malik, but he could feel her simmering frustration. Malik, on the other hand, felt a wave of relief. He knew the battle wasn't entirely over. Karen was unlikely to give up, but he had achieved a significant victory. The truth had come to light, and Karen's support was visibly waning. After the tense meeting, the atmosphere in the community seemed quieter, but Malik knew that things were far from settled. He continued to monitor the situation, ready to respond to any moves from the HOA or Karen. However, just a few days later, he received a letter from the HOA. This time, the tone of the letter was entirely different from their previous correspondences. Malik carefully opened the envelope, revealing an official document stamped with the HOA seal. The letter acknowledged that the HOA had no authority to interfere with his property, and that all prior demands to dismantle his fence were without legal basis. Furthermore, it stated that the board had decided not to pursue any further action regarding the matter. Most importantly, the HOA offered an apology to Malik, admitting that their previous handling of the issue had been unfair and inappropriate. Malik read each line, feeling a profound sense of relief. This was not just a legal victory, but an official recognition of his rights, something he had fought tirelessly to secure. However, the most striking part of the letter wasn't the apology, but a major announcement. Karen had been asked to step down from her position on the HOA board. The letter didn't go into detail, merely stating that Karen's behavior during this incident was inconsistent with the organization's values and had tarnished the community's reputation. Malik understood that this outcome wasn't solely due to public criticism or the evidence he had provided. Karen's downfall was the result of mounting pressure both within and outside the HOA. Many residents, upon learning the full truth, demanded a vote to remove Karen from her position as vice president. Even her closest allies on the board could no longer shield her. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. After being asked to resign, she reacted with visible anger. According to an internal source, Karen held a private meeting with a few remaining loyal members, attempting to strategize a comeback. But all her efforts were futile. Most people within the HOA now wanted to distance themselves from her, unwilling to associate with someone who had brought disgrace to the organization. Karen also lost the community's support. On online forums, numerous residents shared stories about how she had abused her power in the past, forcing compliance with unreasonable regulations and using the HOA as a tool for personal agendas. These revelations, combined with her public failure in Malik's case, cemented her complete downfall in the eyes of the community. Malik received the news with a mix of relief and satisfaction. He didn't gloat, but seeing Karen held accountable for her actions was a deeply meaningful moment. This wasn't just his personal victory. It sent a powerful message to anyone who had been oppressed by the HOA or individuals like Karen. Justice could prevail if you stood firm. That evening, Malik enjoyed a peaceful moment on his porch, looking out at the fence he had fought so hard to keep. A gentle breeze swept through, bringing a sense of comfort he hadn't felt in a long time. At last, this land truly felt like his, not just legally, but in his heart. The first morning after receiving the apology letter from the HOA, Malik woke up with a genuine sense of relief. He opened the door, stepped out onto his yard, and took in the side of his property. Now peaceful, free from tire tracks scarring the grass or the disruptive honking of cars. The pathway that had once been used as a shortcut was now completely blocked off by the sturdy fence he had fought so hard to keep. Malik sat on the steps of his porch, watching the sun climb higher into the sky, his heart filled with the tranquility he had long awaited. His journey to defend his rights was not just a legal victory, but also a declaration of his resolve against pressure and prejudice. Though the conflicts within the community had once reached a boiling point, the tension had now dissolved. Many residents who had previously remained silent or even sided with Karen began to show respect toward Malik. One afternoon, as Malik tended to his lawn, an older neighbor approached him, an awkward smile on his face. "I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner," the man said. "You did the right thing. You've taught us a lesson about standing up for what we believe in." Those simple words carried profound meaning for Malik. They weren't just a personal apology. They were a recognition from a community that had once turned its back on him. Gradually, greetings and friendly smiles started to appear whenever Malik passed his neighbors. He hadn't sought their acceptance, but he appreciated this change. As for Karen, she virtually disappeared from community life after her downfall. Despite her attempts to make a comeback through rumors and small meetings with her remaining loyal followers, she couldn't regain her lost credibility. The residents, who had once been intimidated by her influence, no longer wanted anything to do with her. Eventually, Karen sold her house and moved away. Reflecting on his journey, Malik realized that this battle had never been just about the land, the fence, or the HOA. It was a lesson in perseverance and the power of justice. He understood that doing the right thing often comes with challenges. It requires struggle, courage, and the willingness to face adversity. Malik also knew that his story had inspired many others. One day, he received a letter from a stranger in another state. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm dealing with a similar issue with my HOA, and your experience has given me the confidence to stand up for myself. You didn't just protect your own rights, you've helped people like me feel less alone. Reading those words, Malik smiled. He hadn't just safeguarded his home, he had set a positive precedent for others who faced injustice, encouraging them to stand up and fight back. Months later, when everything had settled, Malik stood on his porch, looking out at the lush green lawn, the sturdy fence, and the securely locked gate. This land was now more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of determination and faith in justice. The sky was a clear blue and soft sunlight bathed everything around him. Malik took a deep breath, savoring the fresh morning air. He told himself that, despite the hardships of this journey, it had all been worth it. He had reclaimed not just his rights, but also the peace of mind he deserved. Malik's story is not just a journey of defending property ownership. It is a reminder that perseverance and belief in justice can help overcome even the most daunting pressures. His fight had not only protected his home, but also affirmed the right to stand firm against injustice and undue imposition. If you've experienced a similar injustice or know someone who has stood up against significant challenges in life, share their story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Don't forget to like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel to help us spread more inspiring stories. We'll continue to bring you meaningful content. Thank you for being with us.